we're joined by Simon Goldstein, founder of Goldstein Heather. Simon, cheers for coming on.
Good morning, Ryan. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate. Not bad. How are you?
Good. Yes, very good. Thank you. Very good.
Good. So hopefully this should be a bit of fun. I guess to dive straight into it, I'm in quite an interesting position. I actually knew you before you set up the studio, and then now it's been several years, and I saw that you'd been published in the AJ recently, so it seems like it's all going really well. So I feel quite lucky that I knew you before and after. And I suppose to start with, so you'd worked at Wilkinson Eyre for a while, spent a long time at Squire and Partners, becoming an associate director. Consulted with Ben Adams Architects for a while, and then set up Goldstein Heather. Was there a point, this is what I'm really interested to understand, at what point during your career or your studies or just throughout your life had you considered the fact that you might one day be setting up your own studio or doing your own thing?
I think, every architect has some sort of aspiration to do something on their own, whether it's set up a practice or just do private work on their own. I think it takes a certain type of person to set up, because we all go into this with no knowledge about running businesses. We certainly did, but you learn on the job. And I think it's just about taking those risks. And some people just would rather work for a firm and always work for a firm. And I think working for a firm and working your way up in a firm to sort of director or partner level is just as credible as setting up in some ways. But of course, you don't take on as many risks as your own when you work your way up in a firm. When you do set up, I think you have to be aware that there is these rewards that you do get from setting up don't come instantaneously. And I think people who want quick results is probably not for them, because for us, for example, in the first 6 months, well, Giles and I, we didn't make any money. Just to sort of give a background of how we set up and what actually happened, we didn't have an office. We fortunately had a good contact at a transport consultant who had a very, very nice office in Oxford Circus. We were very lucky, actually. And I think Giles was at a Christmas party just before the Christmas before we set up in the end of 2018. And one of the transport consultants who was there, Giles explained everything about what we were doing, and he said, "Oh yeah, we've got a couple of spare desks in the office." And I think he was quite drunk at the time. And when Giles followed that up the following day to his boss said, "Oh really? Did you say that?" And fortunately, they did follow through, and they did rent us 2 desks in the corner of their office, which was this beautiful A-framed, sensitive heritage building. We had fantastic space and also it's quite nice when you are setting up and there are just 2 of you to work in an office with other people, because that's what we were used to. And although there were a bunch of transport consultants who have the perception of being quite dry and boring, they weren't at all. They were fun and really nice people. And we were there for 4 months and probably outstayed our welcome at some point. But we got a very good deal on very, very cheap rent. We had as I say, a good location in Oxford Circus. And we were, it was great because, you don't have any money to start off. We weren't lucky like some practices are set up who have, financial support or anything like that. We basically set up with no clients, no money. We had our own money that we invested in the company ourselves, just to get things started. And yeah, it was a difficult first few months. And sort of going back to what I was saying, you've got to be prepared to take those risks. You go from having a consistent salary to basically not earning anything. And it was a difficult one for me because we were due to have a baby in the same year, our second one. So, it wasn't particularly great timing, but, it never is it?
Yeah.
And, we were just on the end of the Brexit situation where, it was before Boris made the agreement. So we were starting in turbulent times, and it's probably the worst time, but also the best time to start, because if you're gonna be able to weather that storm, then you should be able to take on anything, really. We're hoping that as we come out of the COVID situation, things can only get better.
So I guess going back to that, when you set up or when you made the decision to set up with Giles, what what's the, because people are often thinking, do you set up on your own? Should you set up with somebody else you've worked with? Like what led you to the decision to work with somebody else as two founders building the studio?
Yeah.
What do you think are the positives and negatives of doing that?
I mean, to get to the sort of practice that we are, what we are now and what we aspire to become, I don't think I probably could have done that by myself. And I think the good thing about Giles and I is that we actually are very different. We actually bounce off each other. And I think two people that are, you could look at Giles and I together and we are two completely different people. Giles is a West London boy, posh. I'm essentially an Essex boy. And we bring different strengths to the practice. I'm probably stronger in space planning and organization. I essentially run the business. Giles is an excellent designer. He's an excellent writer. He's an excellent presenter. And all those qualities together actually work really well, because actually there isn't really anything apart from design, obviously, that we actually are, we overstep each other's ground effectively. So he's happy for me to run the business. I run the office, all those sorts of things. And, of course he inputs to it all. And everything that we do, it's a joint decision. But he's happy for me to lead the finances of the company and the business running, but also, we both go out and get clients. We both have our own contacts, and that's why I think we work well together. And I think, to answer your question, I don't know if, you know this, Ryan, because you knew me before, but when I left Squires, I went to work for a firm that didn't quite work out for me. And after that, I left that job without a job. And so I set up my own practice, which was called Simon Goldstein Architecture, essentially just to do the sort of stuff I was doing while I was at Squires, which is probably what many people do, the private jobs, the house extension work. And, it's sort of extra money in your pocket, isn't it? When you're earning a salary at a big firm, and your friends ask you, you're an architect, aren't you? Can you do my house extension? You think, well, why not? It's extra money, and it sort of pays for a few drinks down the pub or even a holiday in some respects. And I set it up as a legitimate business. I made a limited company. I did it myself with sort of no intention of ever really setting up on my with someone else and making it a big practice. But the problem with that sort of thing is, you can only charge a certain amount of money per job. Something around, a lot of people charge on average about £1,500, £2,000 to £3,000 per extension. It's a fair amount of work to do by yourself. And in order to make the sort of money that I really wanted to make, you have to do an awful lot of those jobs. And those jobs have to be there. They have to be, you have to get the inquiries. And I think when you're doing a lot of jobs, it's a lot of work, and I could have been doing 2 or 3 house extension jobs every 2 weeks. And it's a lot of work for probably not much reward. And I'm not sure I could have really expanded it on my own to the sort of practice that I've sort of made now. And I was in a situation where that was what I was doing. And of course, as you know, and you helped me out on this, I was given the opportunity to contract to Ben Adams Architects. So that helped. And they were very good to me as well, because they hired me on a 4-day basis where I could work on my private stuff for another day. So I kept that going in the background. And it was only when I went out for lunch with Giles and a group of planning consultants who we've worked with for years at Squires, who are really good to us. And we were sort of, you work with people a long time and you become friends with them in some ways. So we had a very enjoyable, boozy lunch. And Giles was in a very different situation to me. He was still at Squires, and he was happy, but he had some news that he wasn't being remunerated as well as maybe someone who was lower down than him. And for him, he had similar aspirations to me, that one day he would love to have set up and started as a practice. But I think in the same respect, I don't think he could have done it by himself either, because of the qualities that I bring to the practice. He probably doesn't have. And we had a chat over a couple of beers and thought, this could work. But it's a very to sort of say these things are very, it's a pipe dream, isn't it? Let's set up one day. What does it actually mean? Does it mean anything? And we were at this lunch and we spoke to the planning consultants. We said, if we were to set up, would you refer work to us? And they said, well, of course, we often come to Squire and Partners because we like working with you two and not with Michael Squire. It's and that was for us, gave us a bit of confidence to think actually this could be a real thing. But for Giles, it's a bit more of a gamble because it meant for him leaving a job that he'd been at for 6 years and setting up. Whereas I really was in a different situation because I sort of had less to lose because I was in a contract situation and doing my own thing, which was never really going to be a big thing. So for me, if it didn't work out with Goldstein Heather, well, then I could have just found another job. But for Giles, it would have meant that he left Squires to set up, and if it didn't work out, then he'd have to go and find something else. And so that was around the summer of 2018. So it took a good few months for us to really start talking to it, and we had conversations with our partners, and they were slightly dubious about it because for them, obviously, they want stability and income. That with kids as well, we can't just take these risks and gambles and not think about our families. And yeah, so it was a decision that we made, and we decided to go ahead with it after meeting up a few times. And so we did the usual things. We started talking to an accountant. We got the business set up, but we knew nothing. We knew nothing about starting a business. We'd never run a business. We'd been associate directors at Squires, and we weren't really given that much responsibility in terms of the sort of business side of things at Squire and Partners at all. You're project running, and you're given managerial positions in terms of managing staff. So we had that experience, and we were sort of running our own mini practices in some ways in terms of we had small teams and we were managing those staff and managing those projects. But going out and getting work and making money wasn't really our priority. It was because we were given those jobs and we did a good job at them, and we knew that we had the experience and we knew we had the know-how to take on projects of different scales to actually deal with them. But going out and getting those jobs and making money from them and negotiating fees and all that kind of stuff, it was new to us. And I think it was all about learning on the job.
Well, actually, on that topic, do you think that for the majority of architects who were, I guess, they're midway through their career, who might be starting to think, I'd quite like to set up on my own, but there might be a skills gap. Do you think that there's enough taught at university or within practices about the business running side, about how you go from just being a cog in the machine to being, your own self-sufficient architect able to run a practice? And I suppose, is enough being done to teach people how to do this? And actually, if the answer is no, what advice would you have for someone who thinks, I'm interested in setting up my own business, I'm not sure yet if it's quite right for me, I haven't experienced it, so without taking a big leap of faith, I don't know, what is there a halfway house, or do you just have to dive in and have a go?
Well, obviously the part 3 is designed to cover those sorts of things. You have your part 1 and part 2, which are very much portfolio and design focused, but your part 3 obviously is all about project management and practice. That's essentially the aim of part 3, is to set you up for those situations. But obviously, you do your part 3, but when it comes to a point where people are actually ready to set up in terms of their experience level, well, you've forgotten it all by then. I did my part 3 in 2008, and 11 years later I set up. So forgive me for forgetting everything I did in my part 3. But I was, funny enough, there's a guy in our office at the moment who's doing his part 3, and I'm his mentor, and I have to read his part 3 exam, and it sort of starts coming back to you a bit, but then I still see the sort of thing they're looking at and covering, and they have to respond to scenarios where they are they're running a practice, sort of theoretical practice, and it's how do you respond to these different situations. But yeah, I think unless you set up a practice immediately after your part 3, which is very unlikely, you don't really know much. And I think if people are thinking about setting up, don't be afraid of it, because of course we all do it, and those that do it, we don't know anything, and it's just about your character. I think it's about whether you've got the the sort of patience. I guess you've got to have patience.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have the drive and the ambition, and you've got to know really what kind of practice you want to be. And it may not be something you know immediately, but you could go into that practice and say, well, I'm happy to be a one-man band. I'm happy to do house extension work in my local area, and that's enough income for me. I can churn out these things in one project a week, and that does me great.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can set up with your mate and just do the two of you. But some people have bigger aspirations, and that's where Giles and I come in. We had the experience at working on large projects, and using that experience now on projects that are 50 to 150 units. Well, if we can get those sorts of jobs in our practice, then we're onto a good thing. And
well, on that, actually, I wanted to ask, so how would someone go from being a small company that's just doing house extensions and really tiny projects? How do you transition into, the scale of projects that you guys have got for such a young studio is really impressive. Like, how do you go from, what do you think has led to that success for you guys?
I think it's one of those cases of this. It's not what you know, it's who you know, and I think that's exactly why we set up. We had a little contact book of many planning consultants, and I think for us, it was all about that we had a lot of experience at stages 0 to 3 at planning, where you're exposed. You often at those sort of stages you're able to do more than one project at once. As I said to you, we were at Squires, we were running the teams with. I was handling up to 10 projects at once. Giles was roughly around the same sort of thing. And each one of those projects comes with a different set of clients, different set of planning consultants. I had projects that I worked on for 2 years where you get really good, deep relationships with planning consultants. And it comes to things like loyalty. And we knew lots of planning consultants. And I think that generally is, since we've set up, been our main source of work. It's yes, there are clients that we've worked with before, but I'd say that's probably a very, very small portion of the work that we've got, because it's very difficult to poach clients from your previous employers, not just because they've got a loyalty to the previous practice, but we've also got a respect for our previous practice. And I don't want to just go and say, don't go to them, come to us. But all of the clients that we've got have come through an introduction initiated by a planning consultant that may have led on then to other projects through meeting other clients. And I think, if you, I remember when I was at Ben Adams and I was speaking to someone who did set up, who then decided to fold up because they only did house extension work. And it's really difficult because house extension work is all private client stuff. So you're only ever going to get those clients once. And the thing that come out of that, of course, is recommendations. And you can advertise on Facebook now. There's lots of local groups and things like that, and that will get you more work, but it won't get you repeat work from that same person. What we wanted to do was be introduced to developers, and we like to do what we call commercial residential work, which is essentially working for developers, doing lots of sites, looking at sites all the time. And we spend I'd say a good portion of our work is feasibility work for possibly pre-acquisition sites where clients and developers are looking at sites to purchase, and we have to do a feasibility, and often for nothing, for free, on the hope that we get the job or we even impress the client. So we might end up doing 4 or 5 feasibilities at no charge. And you get to a point where you become so efficient at them, you can just essentially knock them out in 2 days. But you hope that you impress the client, they buy the site, and that job's yours. But I would say that what gave us the real confidence to set up was the contacts we had, and it basically has been that, really. I think had we have set up with no contacts or knowing 2 planning consultants, I think we would have struggled. And I think, to answer your question earlier about going from doing small projects to large projects, I think we were given opportunities on medium to large projects at early stages because we had those contacts. But perhaps the difference is that we didn't have any work of our own to show. So we were showing work we'd done at previous practices. But it's very difficult until you get to a stage where you've got some projects that you've either pre-planning or at planning or got consent. that you can use in your own portfolio and show clients what you've done. Have a website with work. It's really difficult to sell yourself at that first year where you've got no projects, because why should they take a gamble on us? We pitched to, one of the projects we've got now in Bromley is with a really great developer we really like and work with really well. We pitched to them in I think late 2019, and we didn't really have anything to show them. And these are quite serious developers in Mayfair, and why should they take a gamble on us? Why they could go to any architect. I think what I suppose is a good selling point for us is our drive, our passion, our ambition. That often comes through quite clear when Giles and I sit in a meeting room and we talk about our ambitions and our architectural style and our passion for architecture and the way that we approach a site. And I think they saw that in us, and they were young developers, and they were looking to partner up with new architects. And for them, it was a gamble. And some developers are not willing to take that gamble. They want to work with practices that've got good reputations and good back catalogues of work. And you just got to get those opportunities. And we got those opportunities, and we took them, and we've done really, really good work for them, and they're really pleased with it, and they've given us more work. And that's the other thing as well. You've got to really get repeat work from the same people. And that's where developers are, come into it rather than private clients. But as I say, you've really got to understand from the beginning what kind of practice you want to be. And you might not know exactly, you might not say, oh, I want to be a practice of 23 people, but you have a sort of broad idea. Do you want to be a small practice, medium practice, a large practice? And I don't think, going back to something you said earlier, I don't think I could have really ever been the practice we are now. And not just now, but we will be in a few years' time, because we will be very different to how we are now if I'd have just done this by myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like you've already achieved quite a bit in that. Because how long's the studio been going for now?
Just over 2 years. So we set up January 2019.
So what have there been any key, I know I mentioned the AJ publication, have there been any key moments where, I guess, since you set up the practice, where you've gone, actually, we're actually doing it. Like this is going, we're not just doing it, it's actually going really well. Like, have there been any key standout moments where, because I know a lot of people, when they set up companies, you can kind of get imposter syndrome a little bit, have a bit of success and think, are we where we want to be? And it can be really hard you can be in the nitty gritty of the setbacks, which there are always many in a startup, but it can be quite hard to focus on the positives. What have been the key highlights for you where you've been just thinking, yeah, we're actually a serious contender now?
Yeah, I think when you get instructed on decent projects is when you think, hang on a sec, there's something going right. And that kind of imposter syndrome, I guess you do feel a bit like that. You do feel like, what am I doing? These large practices that have been running for years, who have got these really organized systems, and we don't. What do we know? How do we know that we're? I think one of the things we do quite a lot is we look at other practices that we admire for inspiration. And I think that's a really key thing, not just in terms of we don't know how their organization is set up, but in terms of the type of work they're doing, their social media. And I think you've got to have a sort of aspiration. You can't, we haven't done it yet. We haven't made it yet. We don't know who we are. And one of the things that we were advised to do as well was get in contact with a wise old head who could maybe advise us, because again, as I said earlier, we don't know really how to deal with situations, and there's always going to be sticky situations with clients. There's always going to be, how do you charge fees? What do you charge? And often we can make a decision based on our experience and the sort of resource, and as we go through this, we'll get better and better at it. But it's always a good idea to maybe cross-check that with someone who's kind of done it before and knows what they're talking about. And so we sort of started thinking about, well, who can we ask? Who's a good mentor in some respects to us? And we thought about all the people we've worked with before, and is that such a good idea? Or is it a good idea to ask someone you've never worked with or don't know? Unfortunately, at the time, one of the former senior partners at Squire and Partners, Paul Harrison, was retiring at Squire and Partners and leaving and almost sort of setting up his own design consultancy. But it was almost he sort of saying, well, I've done my 40 years at work. I'm going to sit back and enjoy the rest of my life. And he was more than happy to help us. And he's been a very good help to us. He's been, we thankfully haven't had to use him that often. But it's good to have him there, knowing that if we ever get in a situation with a client or a problem with the way we have to deal with things, or, we consulted with him when we got given the opportunity on a project and we wanted to propose a fee and we weren't sure whether it was too much or too little. And so we sought his advice on that. And I think it's good to have someone there who you can just pick up the phone to. It's not like it's quite a sort of random consultancy. We don't have a sort of regular thing with him. We thought maybe we should do that, but it's actually worked out that we just use him when we need to. And it's incredibly comforting knowing that whenever a situation like that happens, we've just got him at the end of the phone.
Mm-hmm. I think it's I think that seems to just tie in again with it's not what you know, it's who you know. It seems
a little bit, yeah. I mean, I think that's why it's really important not to jump into these things too soon in your career, because if you go into these situations where you don't know anyone, then it's going to be really, really difficult for you to make a success of it, because you're going to run out of ideas. You've got to run out of people to contact, and we've got our fingers in quite a few pots, and we've got contacts at lots of different successful planning consultants who only ever really go to people like Squire and Partners. And off the back of those, I think at Montague Evans, for example, we probably know about 10 partners between us, and then we know beyond that, down the tree, lots of associates, and you can pick up the phone to those guys and go out for a drink with them. And then next few weeks you get an email from them saying, look, I've got a site. Are you interested in looking at this for a client of ours? And it's those sorts of things that if you don't know those planning consultants, then you're never going to get those opportunities. And of course, as I said, it's just still harps back to understanding what type of practice you want to be, because if you are not interested in working with developers and clients like that, and you just want to do private client work, then it's maybe slightly different, because then it's more about just expanding your network, I suppose, isn't it? It's about doing one or two really nice jobs and then building up a portfolio, and then utilizing social media platforms to expand your reach. And a lot of that's through recommendations. And I think if you're happy doing, you could end up doing some quite significant house domestic work, which are very nice projects. I mean, we love doing domestic work, but to run a practice of the size that we want to be, and to utilize our experience and knowledge as best, I think we like working on larger residential projects.
Mm. What do you think that, because I know you talk about, working with developers who would typically work with the Squire and Partners. I see that a lot of small to medium sized practices are winning good projects and going up against big studios and winning. Like, what do you think it is that small to medium sized companies can offer that perhaps the bigger practices can't?
I think that if you can demonstrate that you've got the design chops, the abilities that these large practices have, then you can offer essentially a cheaper fee, because there's nothing to say that we can't produce exactly what a large practice can produce. We have less people, we've got less overheads, but we come from large practices, and so do the people that work for us. So we all know the same sort of thing. And as I said, when we were at Squires, we were running small teams. So it's almost like taking that small team, lifting it out of a big practice and putting it in our studio. And, even in a large practice of 200 people, on that particular project, you're only going to have 2 or 3 people working on it. So it's the same as having that project in our office. And we as I say, we've got that large practice mentality. We put together, work brochures, presentations that are as good as, if not better than, a lot of large practices. And also we can offer a lot more dedication. The client can expect to deal with me and Giles most of the time and not some associate or associate director. And as I say, because of our lower overheads, we are probably a bit cheaper than large practices. And I think often with larger practices, design can get stagnated. There can be repetitive design. There can be the issue that those large practices take your project as a client not as serious as some of the big, more profitable projects in the practice. Whereas for a small practice, that project might be a big project, and therefore it might be something that particularly young practices who are more eager pay a bit more, a fair bit more attention. And, we've got fresher ideas. We haven't been doing this for years. We've been almost like sort of held in a cage for the last 10, 15 years and not been able to exercise our design skills as much as we'd like to at a practice, because you're often constrained by the practice, hierarchy of, you get some freedom of design, but it's still limited. Whereas if you're running your own practice, then you've got the complete freedom to design what you want. And those things are sort of almost being released. And it's now, we're really excited about things like that. We're coming up with all these ideas that, I think also the fact that we worked for practice and you become a little bit frustrated about design in some respects, and you learn how the things that what you wouldn't do, and therefore you start doing the things that you think you would have done on other projects previously. And as I say, we look at other practices that we aspire to, and we start to think, well, where do we want to sit in the architectural spectrum of practices? And that's something that I think we're getting to a stage now where we're starting to consider. I don't think we're there yet, 2 years old. I don't think we'll be there till we're about 5 years old. But it's about us making a decision now about what direction do we want to push the practice into, because there are lots of practices out there, from your local guys in Woking to your large practices in central London, and then in between that there's a load of spectrum of practices, like practices that are 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, and each of those practices are either considered perfectionists at design. They're really good at design. Some practices are very much more commercial. It's the type of sector of work as well. Are people doing hospitality, residential, office? What's their forte? We've got to kind of understand, where do we fit in? Are we going to be considered to be a high quality residential architect? Are we going to be considered to be someone that does a bit of everything? And in terms of our architectural style as well, where do we fit in? Are we going to be considered as one of those really high quality design practices, ones that we admire, who people look at, well, particularly people in the architectural industry, look at each other and say, those guys are good. Those guys are good designers. And that's why it's really important that the type of people we hire as well. We've got to make sure those people that we hire are people that that can do that sort of work and have come from practices like that. And that's why Giles and I always look for people that have worked at practices that we consider as, or other people consider as really strong designers, and come from those sorts of studios. And I think, as I say, we don't know exactly where we sit in the spectrum at the moment, because we haven't got enough work in our portfolio for people to sort of know really who we are and what we do. But I think the way we look at other practices now, I think we want other practices and other people to look at us and say, okay, they're good designers. And that's where you hope that developers and clients start knowing you for what you do. And I think a lot of that has got to come out of built projects, isn't it? It's got to come out of work that you've done, portfolio. And so that moves me on to talking about, the fact that in the first 2 years, you don't have any projects that are built. And if you're lucky enough and you are a practice that is doing small domestic work, then you probably have got stuff built in the end of your first year, maybe. But we're now 2 years in, we still haven't built anything, because most of our projects are medium to large size. And I think everyone knows how long some projects take to go through planning. So you can have all the nice images and CGIs in the world, but that's all you're basing your portfolio on. And currently our website consists of only projects that are conceptual, essentially, and they're not built. But what happens eventually is that those projects do get consent and they do turn into real projects. And we are now, fortunately, working on 2 projects in the office with the possibility of a 3rd one soon, where we're going to take it through detailed design onto site this year. So hopefully, by the end of this year, we should have at least two built projects, which will then obviously get some nice professional photographs of, and then we can start doing things like, well, publicizing those in the media. Then it's like, well, let's push them towards the AJ, let's push them towards Design, and let's start getting our name out there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the next step. It's difficult to push yourself and publicize yourself with the you obviously can do it with planning jobs and CGIs, but it's not as effective as beautiful photographs of well-crafted, beautiful buildings. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll start to see, once we've started completing work, we'll start to see hopefully new work off the back of those jobs. And that's why, again, it's important for us to make sure that we are involved in projects through stage 4. We're there to take it through site and make sure it's built in the way that we intended, and mm-hmm. have good contractors to work with, so we know that they're going to build to the quality that we want it to be.
Well, what I'm going to come on to, that leads nicely into a question I was going to ask, which was, what do the kind of next 5 years of Goldstein Heather look like? But actually, before I do that, I wanted to ask you, because on another point that you mentioned about the type of experience and learning that you get in studio, how would you describe the difference in terms of learning experience of an architect working in a large studio versus coming and working, for a Goldstein Heather?
I think it's different, actually. I mean, we're now up to 8 people, which is different to working as 3 people, but also different to working in practices of 20 and 30 and 50. And we often say, when we start interviewing people for our own practice, who come from, if they come from a practice that's been 50 plus, it is going to be a difference to them. It's going to be a challenge for them to come to a practice like us than working in a large practice. And I think the difference is that you're expected probably in a smaller practice to be working on lots of projects, to have the autonomy to be able to jump between projects. You might be doing, you've probably got 2 or 3 projects as a part 2 or part 3 on your own back. You are the only person working on that project under the wing of Giles and I. But you're producing all the work for it. You're producing, all the visual stuff, the drawings, and we often sit down with those people and make sure that we communicate as best possible the design that we intend for that project, and then they have to go away and do the work. But I think what's different in a large practice is you might be working in a small team or a large team. If you're working on a stage 4 project, you might be in a team of 15 people on that one project. You might be doing package work. And that's what we say to our staff or to our interviewees. We say, look, if you want to be working on large projects at stage 4 as package work, then fine, you've got to work for a big practice. But, if you want to start having more responsibility, I think, those people are picking up the phone, being on the phone to clients and planning consultants, and they're probably only part 2s. And yet, I think you probably get much better experience in terms of pushing yourself forward at a smaller practice than you would at a large practice. But of course, at a large practice, you could probably hide a bit more. I think you can get a prop, and also, well, I suppose as a negative, but also as a positive, you can probably learn off of your peers differently, because you're probably less independent. So you're probably working alongside an associate or a part 3 or even associate director closely on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a good thing, of course. But obviously, as a small practice, yes, of course, you still get that opportunity to work alongside your peers, but you'll be working on different projects to them. Mm-hmm. So you don't have that luxury of being in a team of 3 people or 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will change as we get bigger. There will be people that might be dedicated more to one project. We've got one person in our office that is dedicated to one project because that project is so big. But essentially that project, I think if it was in a large practice, would have 3 people on it. We've only got one person on it. But when the pressure started cranking up on that project, we just draft in resource from other projects that may not be as under pressure as this one.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have 2 people on it. And for us, it's, it means, I think clients understand that they're going to come to a small practice like us. We're not going to be as quick as maybe a big practice because they can just get sort of 5 or 6 people on it. And they might have, Squire and Partners, for example, had an in-house illustration team, an in-house CGI team, an in-house model shop. So suddenly you can just get a nice visual done by an illustrator for that project. Whereas for us, it's the architect doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's why when we employ someone, we need to make sure that those people have the abilities and the skills that we need, the sort of diverse skill set of, being able to produce beautiful images that we can present to our clients using things like SketchUp and post-production on Photoshop, rather than just someone that's good at drawing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there is a difference.
Coming to that question that I did ask, like, what is, you kind of touched upon it quite a bit actually, but how do you think Goldstein Heather's going to look in 5 years' time? What's the plan?
Well, I think I suppose 5 years is quite a long time away. Maybe it's 2 years, 2 or 3 years' time, because it's always difficult to envisage how you're going to be. But I think we've got aspirations to be bigger than we are now. We're expanding. We plan to continue expanding, and it's all got to be on the basis of instructions and work. And I think a lot of it is about the number of jobs you've got in the office, as well as the size of those jobs. So obviously we are working on about 2 or 3 really large projects now that you would find in a much larger practice than ours. But if you've got no other projects, then you could probably still maintain that in a smaller practice. It's then when you get, your project count starts increasing. And that happens naturally because, of course, you're still working on those projects when others come in. So you start with none, which we did. And then eventually you start building and building, and then you end up with 30 projects, live projects at once. And that's when you start to really realize that when clients start saying, well, I want something out this week on that, I want something out this week on that, then you realize that you need to start recruiting again. And obviously you've got more fees coming in because you've got more projects, so you can afford that. But that also means that we can't stay in the studio we're in. So we started, as I said to you earlier, we started in a transport consultant's office, just the 2 of us renting 2 desks. And then when we realized we needed some help, we hired a part 1. And so we put that, we left the transport consultant's office, and we went into a little room, 150 square foot, tiny, that could fit 3 desks for us and our part 1. It was quite intimate, but it was all we could afford. It's you need an office space, but you don't want to pay much for it because you don't really have enough jobs, and also we wanted to take a little bit of money for ourselves because otherwise we wouldn't be able to live. And then after that, we needed someone else, and we realized actually we can't stay in this room, 4 of us. It would be a bit sort of in each other's faces. So we actually, I would say that the workspace model, we looked at all of those types of business centers. We looked at WeWork, we looked at Workspace, and we looked at HQ and Regis and all those types of things. And actually for us, Workspace was a good one because they offer units. They offer different rooms. You're not working in I think we initially thought that we might be quite good to be in one of those big open plan offices where you get a dedicated desk. But I think, I'm really pleased that we didn't do that because, you want to be in your own studio and your own unit. So the good thing about Workspace is it enables you to grow. You can just move to different units within the same building. You can move to different buildings within their portfolio, even if you're in contract with them. So, as I say, we started in a building in Chancery Lane in 150 square foot. We then moved to another office in another building on Gray's Inn Road, which we're in now, which was 300 square foot, and enabled us to fit 6 people in it. So it gave us a bit more room for growth. And then when we did get to about 5 people in that office, we realized again, it was a bit of a tight squeeze. So we moved, fortunately, we slightly took advantage of the fact that in pre-COVID times, that building was completely full. But obviously in the first lockdown, lots of businesses in that building surrendered their leases, and there was lots of empty units, and there happened to be one on our floor, which was 500 square foot. And so we moved into that. So now we've got an office that can take 10 people. But of course, we're now at a stage where we're at 8 people, and it's going to start getting a bit tight in there. So again, I think we're going to have to move. And I think for us, it's we don't want to keep moving because it's difficult, and every time we do it, it costs money and things like that. But I think ultimately what we want is our own studio that we can fit out ourselves, that has a bit more character about it than where we are now. Maybe some exposed beams and exposed brickwork, all that kind of stuff that you often find in architect studios. That is quite inspirational, and also a place that people that we hire want to work at, and that they really enjoy coming to the office. And I think it's got to be at a point where we start to see that we've got a certain number of projects and our numbers start to plateau, and we start to say, this is quite a comfortable amount of people. So I think we're going to be here for a bit longer. Mm-hmm. So the workspace model is good for us now to continually expand, because it means that you're not paying rent for space that you're never going to use for a year. Mm-hmm. So I think we might have one more move before we find that ultimate studio, something that holds maybe 15 people. Or I don't know. I mean, maybe we'll find the next studio might be something that is a big studio. But I think in terms of numbers, I mean, certainly we'll probably expand to 20 people within the next 2 or 3 years, I think. I think the next thing for us is probably to hire a studio manager, because I think we are starting to get to the stage now where look, we've got 6 members of staff plus Giles and I. We've got a studio. We've got lots of admin that comes with that. And I find, as the sort of business running director, that a lot of my time is taken up with the admin side of the business. So therefore, I think it would be really useful to have someone, even on a part-time basis, who is a studio manager. And I think there's no point in doing that right now, because we're not in the studio, we're at home working. But when we are back in the studio, I think that's one thing we definitely are going to start looking into. And then I think, yeah, whether we make another transitional move, or whether it's it ends up being the ultimate studio that we spend a bit of money and fit out, make it really nice place for everybody, and have a little model making corner and things like that. I think that's definitely our next aspiration. But I think financially as a business, we're only really coming out the other side of the 2 years down the line. And this goes back to something we were talking earlier about people thinking about setting up as a business. We only started making a profit at the end of at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. So that's 20 months or so into our business. You make no money in the first 6 months, and then you start treading water for a long time. You're making money, but it's going straight out the door, and your staff and your rent and everything. And then obviously that will happen at completely different times for different companies, different practices and different businesses. When you start making profits, everyone's got different business models. But as Goldstein Heather, we only start to make a profit, and that's when you start to be able to build a bit of cash reserve in the bank, and then you can start thinking about, well, look, that money is there now. We can start spending on studio space and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think we just want to build that up a bit more before we can really afford something that we really want. So there's no rush into doing that. I think if we grow out of our studio in the next 6 months, we'll just move again into another studio, either in the same building or in a nearby location through Workspace. I think we're definitely keen on staying in Clerkenwell. We really like the area. There's lots of architects around there. There's lots of inspiration. Obviously, there's lots of design showrooms and things like that, and nice pubs and things. So we definitely keen to stay in the area. I think we'll cautiously expand. and we'll see how it goes with, hopefully we'll get to a point where we've got lots and lots of projects and we need more staff. And, I think we're not going to get to a point where we've got so much excess baggage either. So we just, it's about getting that balance right, isn't it?
Well, really, congratulations on everything over the last few years, mate. It's been really interesting, kind of tracking the rise of the studio. And thanks so much. I think we're out of time now, but thanks so much for all of your insight today. It's been really interesting. Hopefully, there's a lot of information in here that aspiring young entrepreneurial architects can take from, or just a lot of information that people can learn on the benefits and drawbacks of working in, small studio versus large studio. I'm going to link your website for people who are watching this on YouTube. I'm going to link the website for Goldstein Heather and for the various social media platforms in the comments or in the description below. But yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for your time today, Simon. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for the opportunity to let us talk about our practice.